What's up everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be taking a look at something that I've never seen before. This is the Super NES Control Deck. And I didn't even know these existed, but it's really interesting and it is much more compact than the original Super NES. I think the biggest change in this revision is obviously the size, but there's also quite the difference when you look at the board inside, because everything is on one board, unlike the original model, which had multiple boards inside. Because I've never seen one of these before, I'd like to give some cool information about it later on in the video, but first I'm going to explain how to tear this thing down a little bit. Starting off, there are only 4 screws on the outside of the console, and these are just the standard Super Nintendo game bit. I initially thought there might have been more than 4 screws, and that one might have been under one of these stickers on the back, but eventually I found out that these 2 halves were just completely stuck together. I don't know what was spilled inside of this console, or what exactly was inside of this console, but it was very sticky. I really had to pry on that with my fingers a decent amount to get it to pop open, but now that it's open, you can see what I'm talking about. There's some kind of brown substance in here, and it is so sticky, and I was really struggling to even get it to clean up. In fact, I used so many Q-tips and cotton balls in this, and a lot of isopropyl alcohol to get it to clean up as well as I did. You'll notice that the footage of me cleaning this up is sped up quite significantly. I had almost 2 hours of footage that I needed to cut down, so hopefully you guys can still see me cleaning this up pretty well. But as you'll be able to see by the Q-tips I'm using, there is a ton of that stuff coming off on it, and it's really disgusting, but you'd be surprised how many consoles I've worked on that have had pop or some other kind of substance like this spilled inside of it, and it is super difficult to clean up. While I'm speeding through cleaning this up a little bit, I wanted to go ahead and give you guys some of the information I found out on this console. It looks like this model of the Super Nintendo was released to be a more cost-effective console, meaning it was cheaper for Nintendo to produce, and it was also cheaper for consumers to purchase it. And from what I can tell, the factor that saved the most money when it came to manufacturing for Nintendo was having everything on the same board. And not only that, but in my experience, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to work on too. This console was definitely a lot cheaper than the original release of the Super NES as well, because the original console was introduced at $200 or $199, and this console, when it released, was bundled with a game, and you only had to pay $99 for it. So it effectively cost half the amount of the original system. Despite this console bundle being such a great deal, it didn't sell very well, and it looks like the biggest reason for that is it was released in 1997, which was 1 year after the N64 came out, and obviously most people were enamored with the 3D graphical capabilities of the N64. Anyways though, despite the shortcomings of how many units this sold, it seems like it was a really good deal, especially for the time. And Nintendo is very well known in doing this for their consoles. The NES had a similar version of this, and obviously they've done that with the Wii as well as the Switch at this point too, of having a reduced priced model and making it a little bit more accessible. Back to me cleaning this. As you can see, this thing is absolutely disgusting, and as I said before, I don't know exactly what was spilled in here, but I was having a ton of trouble getting it to come off. That's why my footage for this video ended up being so long in the end, because I was really having to scrub on this to get whatever it was to come off. And I will say, that is the unfortunate part of working on something like this, is in the end, it won't turn out as nice and clean as some of the other stuff I've worked on. But still, it definitely cleaned up to be a lot cleaner than it was before, and that's really the biggest thing you're looking for. The inside was definitely the worst of this console, and the outside cleaned up much nicer than the inside did. But I'm going to zip through cleaning the rest of the bottom of this and get to the next part. Next, I'm going to clean up the motherboard just a little bit. The most dirty part of this was the spot where the power cable and AV cable plug in on the back of this. You can tell something was definitely spilled and got in between the cracks of where this meets the shell. But again, it's not completely horrible, and it still cleaned up pretty nice in the end. And I will say, luckily the board itself was pretty clean, and thank goodness there was no corrosion on it from what I could tell. The other part of this that needed cleaned the most is the plastic part where the controllers plug into. And typically on these older consoles where there is not a fan, that ends up being one of the dirtiest parts, because a lot of dirt can get up in there where the controllers go. Now I'm going to finish cleaning this up a little bit, and as soon as I'm done with it, it can be screwed right back into the bottom part of the console. Now that it's done, I'm going to go ahead and screw it back in, and as you should have been able to see earlier, this is held in by only 6 screws. There are 2 that go where the cartridge reader is, 1 in the back, and then 4 where this metal shielding is. Alright, and now that we're done with that, I can go ahead and swap this out with the top half of the shell. And this might be almost as dirty as the bottom of the console is. And honestly, that surprises me, and makes me wonder, it might not be pop, because if some kind of pop had been spilled on the inside, then I wouldn't think that so much of it would be stuck to the top of the inside of this, but maybe I could be wrong. Regardless of what it is, the inside of this is still disgusting, and even though it didn't clean up completely perfect, it still ended up much better than it was beforehand. And again, that's all that matters when you're doing this. And as you can see here, I am removing this plastic slot for the cartridge reader in order to be able to clean this up a little bit better. And moving that out of the way just helps me be able to reach everything better. I recommend being very careful with these two plastic doors because they are held in with a spring, and you definitely do not want to lose the springs to those. Again, I am going to speed through the rest of me cleaning this so we can go ahead and start putting it back together. Now that the inside of the shell is clean, we can go ahead and start on the outside. And usually the thing that I start with on consoles like this is the logos, because a lot of dirt and dust like to settle in between the cracks of those. And as you can see, both of these logos cleaned up very nicely. And now that that's done, I can go ahead and focus on cleaning the rest of the shell up. And the other thing that is good to do is go in with a brush on anywhere where there's cracks or crevices, because again, dirt will sit there and it'll stick there, and it's kind of hard to get it out with just a cotton ball. So using a brush, make sure that you get it all out and get it looking great. And as you can see, the top of this shell is now looking great. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about these little black scuff marks, but they don't look as bad as some of the dirt that was sitting on top. And now that I'm done with the top, I can go ahead and start cleaning up this plastic part for the cartridge, so that way I can get it put back in. Now that I have that all cleaned up, the last thing I'm going to do before I put this thing back together is get these little doors for the cartridge to go into all cleaned up. Now that everything for the inside is cleaned up, we can go ahead and put this back together. So again, the two halves just go right on each other, and you only have to put the 4 screws back into place. Now to finish up, I'm just going to try to make sure that the outside of the shell is as clean as possible. And like I said earlier, the outside cleaned up much better than the inside. And honestly, that's what matters most. As long as everything runs fine, the inside doesn't have to be as pretty as the outside. But you want the outside to look good because obviously that's what you're going to be seeing the most. That was definitely one of the most simple consoles that I've ever had to take apart and clean, and it's always nice whenever you can open up a console and it's not super complicated, because some of them are just way more complicated than I think they probably should be, like the PS4 for example. But now that I'm done cleaning this, I'm going to go ahead and plug it in and throw a game in to test it. I'm going to be testing this with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. While I'm testing this, I'm going to go ahead and do my outro. Thank you guys for watching, and let me know if you liked it, and let me know if you have one of these that you're going to be cleaning yourself. Go ahead and drop a comment down below, and please subscribe if you're new. I have some more cool videos planned for the future, and I will see you guys next time.